Stop leeching off me, you parasite. For over 20 years, I thought I had devoted myself to Tom. But was this how he really saw me? I wasn't leeching off him, I was just trying to support him. Despite thinking this, I couldn't find the words to say it. As my strength drained away, Tom continued. John is a working adult now. So there's no reason for you to keep leeching off me anymore. But shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses. Tom shouted. It's no use, my feelings aren't reaching him. I felt something break inside me right then, like the love thread between our hearts snapped. At the same time, my feelings for Tom began to fade. Just moments ago, we were husband and wife, but now he felt like a stranger. Tom had been using me all along, he never really loved me. If he did, he wouldn't have been so brazen about his affairs or tried to kick me out. I don't care what happens to a man like him. No, I have to destroy him completely. I made up my mind and raised my head to look directly at Tom. My name is Emily Johnson. I'm a 50-year-old housewife, married to Tom for 25 years. Our son, John, who was born a few years after we married, graduated from college and started working this year. With child-rearing behind me, I can finally focus on doing what I want. At least, that's what I've been thinking lately. But there's one problem, my relationship with Tom. He hasn't been a good husband or a dad, far from it. Finding his good qualities is like searching for a needle in a haystack. He cheats on me and doesn't even give me a proper share of his salary. Could you at least give us enough for living expenses? Huh? Who do you think you are, talking back to me when I'm the one providing for you? Tom always snaps back like this. Maybe it's hopeless, divorce might be the only option. Lately, I've been thinking that more and more. But I can't just ask for a divorce so easily. The truth is, my father-in-law, who is sick and hospitalized, has asked me to look after Tom. I owe Tom's dad, so I need to endure as long as I can, I tell myself. I can't ignore his words, but the desire to divorce is strong. Torn between these conflicting emotions, I found myself reminiscing about the happy times before our marriage. The happiness I found before getting married stemmed from a tragedy that struck my family. My parents ran a small diner. My dad was the cook, and my mom handled the service. Of course, the food was delicious. But my dad was terrible at business. He started the diner because he wanted to feed people good food until they were full. That's a noble sentiment, but he ran the place solely on that principle. He rarely thought about profit. As long as customers left satisfied, that was enough for him. Naturally, our finances were always tight. Even so, I felt proud as a child to see customers leave satisfied. So I never interfered with my dad's way of doing business. But when I was in college, disaster struck. The company that supplied ingredients to my dad's diner went bankrupt due to the recession. We've already paid this month's bill. If this keeps up, we'll have to close the diner, my dad lamented. Our finances were already on the brink. There was no extra money to cover the loss. Seeing my parents so downcast made me anxious too. But as a college student, there was nothing I could do. And it didn't seem likely that the bankrupt company could refund us. The only path left for us seemed to be closing the diner. That's when one of our regulars, a man, spoke up. Close the diner? It's such good food, that would be a waste. But the company that supplied our ingredients went bankrupt. And now we'll have to take on debt. In that case, I'll personally lend you the money to keep the diner going. And just like that, our regular customer really did lend my dad the money. Thank you. We'll definitely pay you back. Take your time with the money. Just make sure to keep serving that delicious food." With those words, the man left the diner. After that, my dad began dealing with another food supplier. It was a large wholesaler, and the cost of ingredients was even cheaper than before. Thanks to that bit of luck, our diner narrowly avoided bankruptcy. About a year later, I went with my dad to repay the man. While they were talking, a young man approached me. "So, you borrowed money from my dad, huh?" When I heard the story, I realized he was the son of the man who had lent us the money. His name was Tom, and he worked at his dad's company. "You're pretty. How about going out with me sometime?" "Huh? With you? Come on, think of it as a way to repay the favor for the loan." It's true that the money he lent us saved us. But my dad already expressed his gratitude properly. I didn't owe him anything more. Or so I thought, until Tom leaned in and whispered in my ear. "Wouldn't want people to think the daughter of a diner owner is ungrateful." I could spread that around, you know. But I couldn't argue back. Even if he did spread rumors, it wouldn't hurt me directly. But it might cause trouble for my dad. What would the customers at the diner think? These thoughts stopped me from rejecting Tom's offer. I didn't want to, but I told myself I'd endure it just this once. So, I went out with Tom. But to my surprise, I actually ended up having a good time. Tom's stories were interesting, and he knew all the best places to go. The restaurants he chose were stylish and impressive. My first impression of him had been awful, but maybe he wasn't so bad after all. That was where I made my mistake. Before I knew it, Tom had me wrapped around his finger. "I enjoy being with you, Emily. I enjoy it too. For the first time, I feel like I could marry someone as good and genuine as you." Swayed by such simple words, I began dating Tom with marriage in mind. Over time, Tom continued to win me over with various tactics. Eventually, I married him a few years later. Of course, at the time, I had no idea that marrying Tom was falling into a trap. He was kind to me, and I genuinely believed he loved me. But it was all a lie. As soon as we got married, Tom showed his true colors. "Here's this month's pay. Make it work." I opened the envelope Tom handed me. Inside was his pay slip. His salary was deposited directly into our account. So there was nothing unusual about just getting the slip. But one thing struck me as odd: the pay slip was handwritten. Nowadays, that's almost unheard of, but 25 years ago, when we got married, it wasn't uncommon for things to be handwritten. As personal computers were just starting to become mainstream. $1,000. I guess this is normal, I muttered to myself, trying to reassure myself as I made ends meet with the small amount of money. As our marriage went on, I started noticing other things that felt off. Like Tom's routine. He would head out of the house at the usual time each morning. But when he'd be back changed daily. "I'm busy with all kinds of work since I'm taking over for my dad," he'd say. "Then at least call before you come home. You're so annoying." "Fine. I'll call you," Tom shouted. His outburst only made my unease grow. Was he spending his time out somewhere? Could he be seeing someone else? These thoughts crossed my mind, but I was too afraid of his shouting to confront him. In the end, despite my suspicions about Tom, I kept silent. Soon, John was born. I thought that with a baby, Tom might change a little. But he didn't. In hindsight, it was around this time that I first began to vaguely consider divorce. Then, when John was just entering middle school. I got a call from my mom while I was out shopping for dinner. What? Dad's been hospitalized? It was news that my dad had been admitted to the hospital. I rushed there in a panic. Your mom was just being dramatic, my dad said with a hearty laugh, and I felt relieved. But then, I remembered something that made my heart skip a beat. I forgot to tell Tom. It was too late. My phone showed numerous missed calls from him. When I finally called back, Tom's irritated voice greeted me. Where the hell are you? Get home and make my dinner. I'm sorry. My dad. What? Your dad? Tom's tone grew harsher. I replied in a small voice. Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized. Who cares about your dad? You're my wife. Tom's shouting made me flinch and close my eyes. I was terrified of his yelling. But I couldn't back down now. Steeling myself, I spoke up. Is it wrong to worry about my dad? Is that too much to ask? Shut up. Don't you dare talk back to me. No, I'm going to speak my mind. If it were your dad, you'd rush to his side, wouldn't you? I asked, expecting him to reflect on the situation. But Tom's response was beyond anything I could have imagined. Huh? If my dad was hospitalized, I'd ignore it. It's not like I need him around. I was speechless. He had to be lying. But I couldn't bring myself to argue. After a long pause, I finally said to Tom, I'm not like you. I'm sorry, but you're on your own for dinner tonight. That was all I could manage before I ended the call, still in shock. After that incident, I realized I could no longer trust Tom. It finally dawned on me that the happiness I had before we got married was just an illusion. Oh, I see. Tom didn't want a wife, he wanted a maid. I muttered to myself, feeling a pang of sadness. But I knew I couldn't let myself wallow in it. Right, if I'm going to divorce him, I need to start preparing. I began planning for a divorce. A few years later, Tom's dad was hospitalized, and his condition was quite serious. He might not be able to come home again. I relayed the doctor's words to Tom, but he remained unfazed. So, it's going to cost money, huh? This isn't the time to be worrying about money. Don't you understand? I get it. I'll talk to my brother. Tom contacted his brother, who was married but childless, hoping he might cover the hospital expenses. Can you take care of it? Things are tough for me with John and Emily to support, Tom said. As if it were someone else's problem. The way he spoke reminded me of how he reacted when my own dad was hospitalized. It was clear Tom didn't care at all about his own dad. I couldn't hold back any longer. Enough. I'll figure out how to cover Dad's hospital expenses myself. Don't forget you said that. Tom shouted. I nodded firmly. In the end, my outburst led to us taking on the burden of Tom's dad's hospital bills. Eventually, Tom's dad stepped down from his position as president of the company due to his illness, and Tom took over the role. But Tom was clearly displeased with me taking charge of the situation. Tom has been rarely showing up at home ever since. Even when it was time to discuss John's future, Tom ignored my calls and didn't come home. Dad's not coming home again today, is he? John asked one evening. I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean to drag you into this. It's fine. I don't care about him. But I want to go to college in Tokyo. That's right. Don't worry about the tuition, I'll figure it out. Before long, John was accepted to a university in Tokyo. Unsurprisingly, Tom didn't even see him off. After John moved to Tokyo, the house felt incredibly empty. By that time, Tom was only coming home about once a week. "Can you transfer a bit more money? We've got your dad's hospital bills, after all." "Huh? I'm already transferring more than half my salary. It's just you now, so it should be enough." The money Tom was sending was only a fraction of his salary. It was obvious he was lying about the amount. But I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. A few years later, I got the news that John had found a job. John's got a job now, so maybe it's finally time to talk about divorce. I had everything in place for the divorce. All that was left was to figure out the timing. When and where could I bring it up without making things worse? That's all I could think about. Then one day, after visiting Tom's dad in the hospital, I came home as usual. As I went to unlock the front door, I was startled to find it already open. Could it be a burglar? I nervously peeked inside. From the living room, I heard the sound of the TV and Tom's laughter. He was home. Relieved, I walked into the living room. There, I found Tom laughing loudly at the TV. "So you're home?" "Yeah, I thought I'd tidy up the house a bit." "Tidying up?" I looked around the room as Tom said that. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that some things were missing. "Wait, it feels like something's missing." "Oh, yeah." I threw them out. "Your stuff. You threw out my things?" Shocked, I rushed to my room. The room was nearly empty. My computer, my TV, even my favorite mug was gone. And worse, my bed and everything else had disappeared. "What is this?" "What did you do?" "I got rid of it because you don't need it anymore." "Don't need it?" "What am I supposed to do now?" I raised my voice, and Tom frowned, turning his gaze away with a sigh. "How do I put this? I'm tired of supporting you." "What?" "I'm your wife." I snapped back, and Tom's face twisted with anger. He suddenly shouted, "Do I have to spell it out for you? Stop leeching off me, you freeloader." For over 20 years, I thought I had been devoting myself to Tom. But was this really how he saw me? I wasn't leeching off him, I was just trying to support him. Even though I wanted to say this, I couldn't find the words. My strength left me as Tom continued. "John is a working adult now. So there's no reason for you to keep leeching off me anymore." "But..." "Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses," Tom yelled. It was over. My feelings didn't reach him. I felt something break inside me right then. Like the love thread between our hearts snapped. At the same time, my feelings for Tom began to fade. Moments ago, we were husband and wife, but now he felt like a stranger. Tom had been using me all along, he never really loved me. If he had, he wouldn't have been so brazen about his affairs or tried to kick me out like this. I didn't care what happened to a man like him anymore. No, I had to destroy him completely. I made up my mind and raised my head to look directly at Tom. "What? You got something to say?" "No. If you want me to leave, then I'll leave." I slammed the living room door and stormed toward my room. But there was nothing left. Not even a single piece of clothing remained. Don't bother looking. I had everything taken away by the junk removal service. Which service? There's a flyer right there. That's the one. I picked up the flyer that had fallen to the floor. As I dialed the number, I shot a final remark at Tom. You're going to regret this. I stormed out of the house. After a moment, the call connected. When I explained the situation, the person on the other end quickly understood. Apparently, they had noticed something off about Tom's behavior and had kept everything in storage just in case. We'll bring your belongings to you right away. Thank you for your understanding. I thanked them sincerely and ended the call. I then went to the storage facility, thanked the staff again, and had my belongings moved to a storage unit I had just rented. I felt relieved knowing that my things were safe. You're not going to get away with this, Tom, I muttered to myself as I dialed John's number. After briefly explaining the situation, I finished with, "So, I've decided to move out and proceed with the divorce. Make sure you're ready too, John." "Okay?" Okay. Got it." John quickly ended the call, sounding a bit nervous. Was I that angry? I wondered as I put my phone back in my bag. I headed to a nearby business hotel. The truth is, I already had a new place lined up. The reason was simple. I had been planning to discuss the divorce with Tom soon. After the divorce, I would move there and start my new life. Well, it just happened a bit sooner than I expected. Honestly, I wasn't too bothered. My plan was only moved up by about 2 weeks. 2 weeks in a hotel. What a waste. I couldn't help but think it was a waste of money, an old habit from my years as a housewife. Maybe I should bill him for the hotel costs too? Well, whatever happens, Tom better be prepared. After murmuring to myself, I started executing the post-divorce plans I had been considering. 10 days into my stay at the business hotel, I received a call from Tom while I was having lunch. The moment I answered, Tom's voice boomed through the phone. You stole my money." "What? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. It's about my dad's hospital bill. The hospital just called and said we need to pay." "Ah, so that's what this is about." I sighed before responding calmly. "That's your responsibility, isn't it? I was kicked out, so it's not my problem anymore. I've been transferring money for your living expenses. That should be paying for it." "True, but isn't the checkbook for that account with you now?" I replied with a straight face, knowing full well that there was no money left in that account. I couldn't help but smirk. "I've got the checkbook, but there's nothing in the account. That's why I'm saying you stole it." "I didn't steal anything." "Don't lie. Who else could have spent it? Doesn't he realize how little he was transferring?" I thought to myself, then said, "There was only a small amount to begin with. If you're short on money, why don't you use your allowance?" "Allowance?" Tom began to panic noticeably. It seemed he thought I didn't know about it. From the beginning of our marriage, Tom had been giving me handwritten pay stubs. He did this to hide the fact that he was skimming money from his salary, which became his personal allowance. "Earlier, I asked your dad about your salary. I asked him how much you get." "That's..." He seemed a bit puzzled, but he told me. "So, I know you've been pocketing some money." Tom fell silent. The silence stretched on, making me wonder if he had hung up. Finally, he broke the silence, yelling, "What's wrong with me spending the money I earn? You're the one who blew through what I gave you." Yeah. So what? This is it. We're getting divorced. I'm going to demand alimony. And you better pay back the money you stole." At that moment, I couldn't help but smile. He had just given me exactly what I needed. Now, Tom wouldn't be able to weasel out of this. With a grin, I responded. Oh, thank you. I've been wanting a divorce too. Let's meet to discuss the details. Why don't you come over to my place? What? No, wait. You want a divorce, right? I'll be waiting with the evidence of your affairs. I couldn't see his face, but I could tell Tom was probably turning pale. His voice betrayed his panic. Evidence? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I have the photos. Photos? I could almost picture him struggling in my thoughts. And I had to hold back a chuckle as I kept going. I'll give you the address. Let's meet next Sunday to go over everything. I gave him the address of a certain place and quickly ended the call. Success. Now I just need to make him apologize. Honestly, this was going to be the hardest part. I steeled myself for the task ahead. Then came Sunday. I arrived at the meeting place ahead of time. He should be here soon. I scanned the area and spotted Tom out of the corner of my eye. Over here. I waved at him and he looked up, startled. What? Here? Yes, I told you the address. But, whose mansion is this? Tom looked past me at the house behind. It was a luxurious mansion worth about $1 million. Much larger than a typical home, it had a garden, 3 stories, a basement, and even a theater room. In the attached garage sat a luxury car. I pointed at the mansion with a smile. This is my house. It's brand new, isn't it beautiful? What? This is your house? Yes, that's right. I had this house built a while ago, planning to live here after the divorce. The place I had called Tom to was indeed my newly built home. Naturally, Tom, who still thought of me as just a housewife, was completely stunned. I gently pushed him forward and led him inside. I guided him to the living room. Now, shall we get down to business? This is my lawyer, I said, introducing the lawyer who had been waiting inside. But Tom was too distracted to pay attention. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, barely focusing on anything. He didn't even glance at the evidence of his infidelity laid out on the table. He wasn't responding to any questions either, making it impossible to have a proper conversation. Finally, after a long pause, he muttered, "How did you afford a house like this? Is that really what you're worried about?" I thought, but I decided to answer him. I bought it, of course. Don't lie. There's no way a housewife could afford this. It's true that buying a house worth $1 million usually requires an income of around $150,000 a year. But I had that kind of income, so I calmly replied, "It just means I earn that much." "Do you have a problem with that?" "But how?" A friend's company needed help, so I pitched in, and before I knew it, things started going well, I explained. The story went back a few years. When my dad was hospitalized, and there was tension over that, I decided to divorce Tom. That's when I started preparing for it, beginning by finding a job. I needed a job to support myself after the divorce, but good jobs were hard to find. So I turned to my best friend, Catherine, for advice. "Why don't you help me with my work?" she suggested. Work. What kind of work? Aquaculture farming on land. Aquaculture farming on land involves creating artificial pools to farm fish, which has the advantage of preventing ocean pollution. Catherine's dad had started such a business, and Catherine had taken over. "So, you worked there?" Tom asked hesitantly. After I started helping, the business suddenly took off. My role was mainly negotiation and administrative tasks. But Catherine appreciated it and eventually appointed me to an executive position. It was all just a string of lucky coincidences, but I think luck can also be seen as a skill. Hearing this, Tom slumped down, but then suddenly raised his head. Okay. Let's forget about the divorce. Why don't we start over? What is he even saying? I thought this to myself as I gave him a cold look and replied. Are you kidding me? In your dreams. No, I'm serious. I really want to start over with you, Tom pleaded passionately. But I knew it was just my money he was after, so I raised my eyebrows and retorted. I don't want anything to do with a cheater like you. And someone who disrespects his dad. But about my dad. Shut up. I doubt you know this, but I've been paying for your dad's hospital bills. Tom had only been giving me a small amount of money, barely enough to cover food, utilities, and other essentials. There was never anything left, so of course, there wasn't enough to cover the hospital bills. Initially, I managed to pay by scraping by, but once I started working, I used my salary to cover the expenses. And yet you never listened to me, and you didn't even visit your dad in the hospital. Well, I mean, how could I trust someone like you? I shouted, and Tom shrank back. After that, my lawyer discussed the alimony. Tom didn't argue, he just kept nodding. In the end, he was persuaded by the lawyer to sign the divorce papers. And we agreed on alimony of $30,000. Now that the divorce is finalized, you'll be responsible for your dad's hospital bills from now on. Yeah, Tom muttered reluctantly, but at least he didn't argue. I felt a sense of relief. Finally, I saw him out, practically pushing him out the door. It's finally over. The only thing that bothered me was that Tom never apologized. But I had one last card to play. Once I did, I was sure he would apologize. The thought brought a smile to my face. A few days later, as I was heading home after stopping by the office, I heard a voice behind me. Hey, Emily. I turned around to see Tom standing there. Don't call me so casually. We're divorced now. Shut up. What did you do? Tom was glaring at me, his face flushed with anger. From the look on his face, I realized that the news must have reached the company. Smiling, I replied, What do you think I did? Don't play games with me. Tell me what you did. How did you get me fired? Tom stomped his foot in frustration, which I found amusing. And I couldn't help but smile. It's your own fault. You were caught having an affair with the company secretary. Tom's affair was with his company's secretary. He thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he was the president. So, right after our divorce was finalized, I informed his dad about the affair. His dad was disappointed about the divorce but furious about Tom's behavior. When I showed him the photos as proof, his anger only intensified. He told me, I've decided to transfer all of my shares in the company to you, Emily. To me? Wouldn't it make more sense to give them to Tom's brother? No, I'm giving them to you. I want you to remove Tom from the president's position. Here's how it worked. Tom's dad's company was a corporation, meaning decisions like appointing executives required a resolution at the shareholders' meeting. In this case, most of the company's shares were held by Tom's dad, meaning he had the power to make decisions on his own. In small companies, it's common for the president to hold the majority of the shares. When Tom's dad transferred all his shares to me, I gained the sole decision-making power. However, it wasn't my decision to remove Tom. I informed his brother about the shares I had acquired and about Tom's affair. His brother then took the necessary steps. "Your brother did what was best for the company," I said. "That jerk. Why would he listen to you?" "He didn't just listen to me. He did what was best for the company's future." As I said this, Tom collapsed to the ground and began muttering an apology. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. No. If I lose my job, I'll be out on the street. That's not my concern. This is all his own doing. Even if you apologize, I won't forgive you. Please. I'm begging you." Tom dropped to his knees, bowing low to the ground. I turned my back on him. "Sorry, but there's nothing I can do." "Why not? If you're the one with the shares. I sold them to your brother and his wife. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." At that moment, I heard Tom start to sob. Of course, I pretended not to notice as I walked away. After being removed from his position as president, Tom was forced to leave the company. If he had been a dual-role employee and officer, he might have been able to stay on as an employee. But Tom had gotten the job through his dad's influence and had always been arrogant. "I'd rather not be just an employee," he had once said. Because of that, he was thrown out as soon as he was removed from his position. I heard he's now working part-time at a supermarket, but at his age, finding another full-time job will be tough. He'll likely spend his old age full of regret and without much money. As for me, after the divorce, I've been able to focus even more on my work. I don't see myself getting married again. But I do have a couple of male friends from work. Maybe a new chapter of life could start for me too. It was while I was thinking about that when I received a call from John. "Mom, I'm going to bring my girlfriend over soon." "Really?" "I'm looking forward to it. I might have failed in my marriage, but I don't want John to make the same mistakes. I'm positive he'll do fine. He's way more level-headed than I ever was."